Oh, hey guys, Joshua Vidovic from Vidovic Arts here. Today we're going to be working on an elemental. So these guys are traditionally found in the fantasy genre, so he doesn't belong to any specific setting. He could be earth elemental, or lava, or ice. It just comes down to you and how you want to use him. So when you print him up, it's up to you how you want to paint him. And this one is an earth elemental. And I'll be making another one that'll be a lava elemental, and that'll be for another video. I'm really happy with the way this guy turned out, and believe it or not, he only took 30 minutes to make. And that, in my books, is kind of incredible, considering the amount of detail that he's actually got. So let's get into the modeling phase. So I modeled this guy on Maya, and I actually started with a sphere. And with that sphere, I used the flatten sculpt tool to make it look more hardened edged, so it looked more like a stone as opposed to a ball. And once that ball was turned into roughly a stone, I could use that and duplicate it to make more stones. Now I could have made the entire model this way, just duplicating stones and making more stones to make him look like a pile of rubble, but I wanted to sculpt in the details on the main body. I used the sculpting tool to put in divots and highlight areas that I wanted to accentuate later on. Now with the actual detailing phase, I used the cut tool, and this allowed me to basically literally cut into the model itself and give it those creases and edges and those kind of divots that are in the model. So if you picture the model as a literal ball of clay and we're sculpting it, the knife tool is a literal knife where you cut into the actual clay piece in the model, and that's how you get the divots and those crevices. So when sculpting, we have to make sure that the model is really high poly, otherwise you end up with these weird looking squares. And you might not have noticed it, but in other games, in low poly games and stuff like that, you can quite obviously see every single polygon, and that's why it's called low poly. Whereas like modern games and games that are high poly, you can't see any of them, which is why they're called high poly. It's like you're not supposed to see them. So when you print these, if you've got a lower poly model, you're 100% going to see the polys. So yeah, if you are going to sculpt some of this yourself, make sure you're working on a computer that can handle some high poly stuff and high poly sculpting. And obviously, the higher poly it is, the longer it takes for Cura or any kind of slicing program you have to work out how to print it. So yeah, keep that in mind. But this wasn't too crazy, and it didn't take Cura too long to work out how to slice it and eventually print it. Now when I was modeling this, I had the full intention to make multiple variants of it, so I want to make another one where he's lava, and I'd like to make another one, I don't know if I will, where he's ice. I think it would be much more impressive to have it printed on like a resin-based printer where you can get like straight see-through stuff, or maybe on a filament that's a clear filament. I'd really love to see that kind of printed up. That'd be really awesome. But for now, I think if I'm going to do an ice one, it'll just be all hand-painted and it'll be very snow-like. I think it might just be stone and snow, which will look cool, but I think it could look even cooler if it was a see-through ice. But that's just me. As for the other variants, the lava one I intend to do in a later video, so keep your eyes peeled for that later on. And this one, I actually wanted to have the tree which I ended up putting on it right from the start. Before I even started the project, I wanted to have a big, nice tree growing out of the top of him, and I just like that idea, like all the earth has come with him from wherever he was slumbering, and someone's woke him up, and he's got up, and he's got a tree still on him. And the explorers or whoever came across him wouldn't have even realized that it was a giant elemental sitting right there under their noses. I just like the idea. I think it's a nice aesthetic. So to get to the point where we put the tree on him, we had to paint the guy. And first I did a black undercoat just with a flat black spray can, and then I started to paint a dark grey all over him. And it took a little while to dry, but it eventually dried, and I started working on the highlights as I do with everything else. So I went from a very dark grey, I think it was Skaven Blight Grey. Was it Skaven Blight Grey? Yes, it was Skaven Blight Dinge, not Grey, and the other lighter grey was Dawnstone. So I used these two paints to work up the highlights, and the Dawnstone I noticed wasn't highlighted enough, it wasn't light enough, so I mixed some white. I think I need to get a bigger range of greys. I think it just goes black, this Skaven Blight Dinge, Dawnstone, and then white. So I definitely need to get some in between there to make sure that I don't have to mix so much. Because that's a real pain when you're trying to paint something nice and fast and you have to constantly mix it and it dries and then you have to mix more, and yeah, it's just not really that fun. So I'm going to have to stop by Games Workshop and pick up some more paints. as I do pretty much every so often. So once I got all the highlights nice and done and it was all dry, I had to mix up a new batch of mud or dirt. And I actually took this from a suggestion in one of my comments, and it was and it was in the video that I actually made that mud mixture of PVA, sand, and paint. And I instead of PVA, I used a plaster, which was way faster. All I had to do with the plaster was way faster. I added the paint and sand, and I mixed it together, and it was awesome. I do think I could have added more brown. It's a little too light for my taste, but it worked out really awesomely. So thanks for whoever commented and suggested that. It worked out marvelously. I think I'll put a tutorial on how to make it some other time, but it's pretty simple. It's just those three things: that plaster and paint and some sand. And you pretty much just apply it with an icy pole stick and it goes on like butter. It's really awesome. So after he was all painted up and I mixed this new compound of dirt, I made the base nice and neat, and I put the mud in places that I thought might build up. So I put it on his shoulders and some on his hands, but in reality he would probably be coated in mud, because if he would come out of the ground he would be completely covered. But I wanted to have him look more stony than mud, just because. So if you wanted to make this more realistic, I guess you would lose a lot of the details because you'd just be slapping mud all over him. But yeah, I'm pretty happy with the way he turned out, even if he isn't as realistic as possible. Another good point about the plaster mix is the fact that it dries way faster than the PVA, which is really awesome. And you can actually kind of use a heat gun to dry it even faster, which I wouldn't recommend using too much because the 3D print is also heat not resistant, so it'll melt if you get too close with a heat gun. So definitely maybe experiment with it and make sure you don't melt your model trying to dry your plaster a little too fast, or whatever kind of paint you're using. So once it was all dry, it was time to add the tree itself. Now I used Warbler once again for this. It was just tiny little strips that I heated up and I rolled into little noodles, and then I put together to look like roots. And the trees I actually got off eBay, really cheap ones. I think they were like $4 for a pack of 6. And they're all like sequentially larger, so you get like a really small one to a pretty big one, and the big one's about the normal size of a tree you would find in Warhammer in general. So I used the mid-sized tree and a really little tree, and I attached the roots that I made out of the Warbler, and the Warbler is really great because it's sticky, and I used that stickiness to just pretty much attach it to the model itself. Just heated it up and pushed it into place, and it worked really nice. As for the other tree, I pretty much just did the same thing minus the roots, and then once it was all done, I gave it a nice coat of brown just to look like roots, and then I put dirt over the top of it just because, well, roots don't just sit out in the open, they have to have some sort of dirt on them. So yeah, he's got some dirt on top of the roots just to make it look a little more real. I added some grass texture and some foliage, like the bush foliage, the kind of stuff that's on the trees themselves. And I just kind of placed it around on him and on the ground where I thought he would be exposed and that would actually grow, and on the ground itself just to match him with his own environment. And I was really happy with how this turned out. I'm really excited to see what other people do with this, especially the fact that you can make it not just this kind of elemental, the fact that you could make it a lava elemental, or I suppose you could make it a water elemental and you could put like mollusks and stuff and seaweed growing on him. There's really no limit to this kind of character because he just could be anything. He's just a giant stone thing, and I really want to see what you guys can do. So he's available on Thingiverse, and if you do make him and paint him up, don't forget to post a make there so I can check him out, and I really love seeing you guys work. And don't also forget to check out my Patreon if you want to support me further. It's just a couple dollars per video, and it helps me out a long way to pay for the materials that I use. And also you can get some exclusive models over there, and yeah, you get some early behind the scenes stuff. Otherwise, check this out on Thingiverse, and I hope you enjoy it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you around. See you guys.